Over the week, a disturbing video surfaced on social media. The now viral video showed disturbing scenes of a university lecturer, now identified as Mr. Mfonobong Udoudom, a senior lecturer in the General Studies Unit of the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, UNN, of attempting to coerce a female student into sexual activities in exchange for academic grades.
Now, since the video made rounds on social media, Mr. Mfonobong Udoudom has now been suspended indefinitely, according to a statement signed by Omowunmi, acting public relations officer of UNN, stating that the university has zero tolerance for sexual misconduct. The shocking case highlights the ongoing issue of sexual abuse and exploitation within academic tertiary institutions in Nigeria. Now, joining us to discuss this matter, we have online with us Omowunmi Ogunrotimi, Executive Director, Gender Mobile Initiative, and also Dr. Benneth Eze here in the studio with us, Director of Academic Planning, Christopher University. You're welcome, gentlemen and lady.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Welcome.
You're welcome. Omowunmi, do we have you?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Omowunmi, despite concerted efforts by the media, CSOs, NGOs to raise awareness and eradicate the issue of sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, harassment in our tertiary institutions, why does it still persist?
So it still persists for a number of reasons, and they're quite clear. First is that sexual harassment is a systemic issue. It is systemic because it is deeply ingrained, and it also thrives on the system of privilege and oppression. So when you look at the issue of sexual harassment in Nigeria, it's actually not an issue that is just specific to Nigeria. Sexual harassment is a global phenomenon that transcends national borders. And as such, there's a growing body of evidence to suggest that sexual harassment thrives due to unequal power relations. We know that in Africa, we have a highly patriarchal system, which, further entrenches male dominance and also makes women and girls a second fiddle. And as such, sexual harassment thrives in spaces that are characterized by power asymmetry. The second reason why sexual harassment or sexual exploitation, as the case may be, continues to thrive is also because there is a depth of institutional accountability. It might interest you to know that in 2018, there was a World Bank report that indicates that 70% of female undergraduates have experienced sexual harassment. If you ask me, by every measure, that is an epidemic proportion. And sadly, we continue to have conversations about this issue, yet higher education institutions do not have the necessary measures in place. I recall that was it 2020 or 2021, there was the Premium Times report that also indicates that we have less than 30 higher education institutions in Nigeria having internal grievance redress mechanisms, which means that, there is a lack of policy frameworks in these institutions. And again, it's also at this point important to share that in 2018, as an organization, we have set up a call center infrastructure to aid, reporting and access to a range of services. And within 1 year, we had 237 cases, and 80% of these cases emanated from campus communities. That is also to further buttress the scale of the problem. And statistics are not just summary data. They are lived experiences of people. And there is a growing body of evidence to also suggest that higher education institutions do not have reporting channels that are survival-centered. And there is also no confidence in mechanisms established by institutions, which means that over the years, institutions have also failed to demonstrate the requisite institutional courage to take complaints seriously, to sanction perpetrators, and to protect people who experience sexual harassment and who report against possible reprisals. So when you look at the combined effect of all the situations that I have painted, what we would experience is a culture and climate that is permissive of sexual harassment and that continues to embolden perpetrators to continue to, carry out those patterns of sexual exploitation and abuse, as the case may be.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Omowunmi.
Thank you so much
Dr.
for that.
Bennett, you heard what
answer.
she said. Institutions are not taking proactive actions. You are a member of the Academic Staff Union yourself. So what can institutions do to, first off, help address issues of sexual harassment and then prevent these issues?
Okay, why I agree with Omowunmi that it's taking epidemic dimension, it's becoming more prevalent in our tertiary institutions and all that. But it's not true that universities particularly don't have policy framework. We do. I know so many lecturers have been sacked as a result of sexual harassment. This happens to be something that we don't joke with at all. I don't know if you're also aware that some universities have even gone a step further by installing CCTV cameras in lecturers' offices so as to monitor their activities. So the policies are there and people are being sanctioned. And the most important thing is consequences. Once you know that if you engage with your students, either consensually or not, it's not even a case of consent. Even when the student is even throwing herself at you, as a lecturer, that is what we call local parentis, you are not expected to have any relationship whatsoever sexually with the student. So, and you know that once you are found guilty, they will lay you off. Then the legal aspects will not determine if ICPC or the victim is ready to press a case, charges in the law court. But these things are there. I know so many universities have laid off a whole lot of academic staff as a result of this.
You speak of these layoffs, but I'm going to ask another question in continuation of that one. Now, the question is the victim now. If the victim comes forward and says, hey, this happened to me and this person has to be brought to book, what happens even after that person has been brought to book to that victim in the context of the faculty and perhaps maybe loyal faculty lecturers who might have been friends of this person who perhaps has lost his job due to that action?
Yes, but right, most
stigmatization from the lecturers themselves.
Okay, most people usually speak out of context, particularly on this issue. The university is under obligation to protect the students. We have several cases. And because this thing is all over the media, the university will do everything to protect the students and nothing will happen to the students. We have cases. It's not as if the schools are not doing anything. They are laying off people every day.
Name some cases.
Number one, a professor was laid off in Ife. He was sacked in Ife. And ICPC took the case and it led to about 3 years imprisonment. We have a case in Unilag. The man is serving his jail term as we speak now. We have a lot of cases. We have a whole lot of cases. There is no university in Nigeria, I can say it authoritatively. I can only tell you that UNN will lay off that man, and if the right thing is done, he will be prosecuted. There is no university in Nigeria as we speak today, because we're talking about technological age. Proving becomes very easy. All she has to do, I am approaching you. All you have to do is just record. I don't know you are recording me. It might be WhatsApp communication, and that is what the panel, this disciplinary panel, that is what they want.
It's easier said than done.
It's easier said than done. I mean, look at the case of the law lecturer in the University of Calabar, and how the young women all came out and very bold about what he had done. And up until now, they've been dragging their feet about the situation. And so these cases that you are naming, there's just one or two of a myriad of situations that slipped through the cracks. And again, it begs to ask the same question that Mazino just asked about the girls and the young women who are able to step forward and say, this has happened to me, and the response from ASU in particular. Okay,
I'm not a member of ASU because I lecture in a private university.
Okay.
But I can speak from private university perspective. Okay. Even in the case of UNICA, there is no way you would just sack the man. The man must be invited by the disciplinary panel. They will do their findings and everything. But I assure you that that case can never be swept under the carpet. It's not possible. So, and I can speak for private universities. I know that for sure, there's no private university in Nigeria today that will take issues of sexual harassment lightly. It's not possible.
Omowunmi, let's come to you. How do these incidents that we've seen so far, let's talk about the impact and the well-being and academic performances of the female students, the impact on all three of the female students in university settings?
Thank you very much for that question. But before I dive deeper into that question, I would like to respond to a few points that Dr. Benedict mentioned. First, I would like to mention that in Nigeria, we have over 1,000 tertiary education institutions spread across universities, polytechnics, monotechnics, and colleges of education. And I would say that based on our extensive years of work, whatever I share here is actually based on research, that most higher education institutions in Nigeria do not have anti-sexual harassment policies. Of course, the ICPC did well by successfully prosecuting Professor Akindele. As an organization, we have a mobile app where students report cases of sexual harassment. And it might interest you to know that even for private institutions, the cases, sexual harassment is highly prevalent. And for private institutions, it's even worse, because when people don't speak out, that in itself is a great predictor of sexual harassment. And that few cases were prosecuted is quite insignificant when you compare it to the prevalence rate of sexual harassment. And that's why I had to highlight 70%. That is an epidemic proportion. That we have people resorting to social media in the first place shows that they do not have confidence in the internal mechanisms of higher education institutions. And I don't think it's okay or it's fair to, as a statement of fact, to generalize that every university, has mechanisms in place, because that would amount to living in self-denial. We're all familiar of, the anti-sexual harassment bill that lingered in the National Assembly for several years. Last year, that bill was passed by the National Assembly and transmitted to the President's table. And I think this is another opportunity, ample opportunity, to call on Mr. President. Yes, we know that he's highly invested in education by virtue of the Nigerian Education Loan Bill. But what exactly is the essence? When students have financial resources, but their educational experiences are still tainted by sexual harassment, thereby, limiting their learning and educational outcomes. And now to the question that you raised, on the impact of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment has debilitating impact on the victims. And unfortunately, women and girls are disproportionately affected. It is even worse for girls and women from low resource background. Because in some sense, it's really difficult for you when you see that you do not have the socioeconomic power to actually move this case forward. So you find out that you're in a situation where you're trying to earn a degree, and you're also trying to call out your institution that would, issue that degree for you. So this is a very, dicey situation that learners in environments of learning find themselves. Sadly, again, we do not have that piece of comprehensive legal framework that criminalizes sexual harassment, so that it can also give more life to policies that already exist. I recall that last year, the ICPC and Gender Mobile Initiative, cooperated to design a policy template that was approved by the Federal Ministry of Education. But as I speak to you, that policy has not been circulated around. So when you think about sexual harassment, it's a system of privilege and oppression. We know for a fact that some people are benefiting from that privilege. And so there is that resistance to change. People do not want, lights to be beamed on their institution because of the potential reputational damage, forgetting that when we don't take this issue seriously, it even poses a lot more reputational damage. When people see that learning environments are not safe for people to thrive and, have educational experiences that are devoid of patterns of sexual abuse and exploitation.
I have a question, please, Omowunmi, and the question is also by extension to Dr. Benneth here. My question is, with your stats or research that you have, does it seem that in private universities, these instances are lesser?
So I don't think, I would say that because fewer cases are reported in itself problematic, because what it means is that people are probably not reporting. But on the reporting app that we have as an organization, we've had a lot of cases from private universities, and these students are scared to disclose their identity to their institution.
Why are they scared?
What we do as an organization is, can you hear me?
If it's a private university, I mean, they should be bolder then.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great. So a lot of the students report to the app, they disclose their identity on the app, but they do not want their institutions to know because of fear of reprisals. So what we do is to write to the institution, and also do what we call, a non-identifying offender profiling. Because when these students report, they share the name of the, lecturer, and they also give descriptions, so that when we write to the institution, they have a sense of whom we are talking to without necessarily also putting us at risk of a defamatory suit. Because again, we've seen cases where students bail out also because of fear of, not furthering their education in that learning environment. So it's a complicated web that it would take mutually reinforcing strategies, especially at the level of the institution leadership, to ensure that, they demonstrate zero tolerance to sexual harassment. But I would say that it's highly prevalent in private institutions, also because the institutions themselves, they live in self-denial. And I would say there was a case that was reported by a student, and at the time when the student when the case was escalated at the level of the private institution, this institution had to lock up the student, and under duress, they mandated her to write a letter.
Omowunmi, I'll let you continue. I'll let you continue.
I
want Dr. Bennett to also answer that question before we go too far regarding the prevalence inside of private institutions versus public ones. So, are they the same? Are there the same amount or numbers of these reported cases from private universities?
Okay, if you talk about the prevalence, the fact is that it is everywhere. If you look at the West African coast, if you look at Africa as a continent, even globally, we have cases of sexual harassment in universities. But one unique factor that distinguishes the private university from the public is the fact that if you report in a private university, you are sure of the school doing the right thing. And secondly, the victim must be protected.
Omowunmi, is that correct in your research?
So I would say that is not, that does not generally apply. That does not generally apply. Because if it generally applies, and I want to say that I'm sure that Dr. Benedict is actually speaking for his school. I don't know the school where he lectures, but perhaps it would also be quite insightful to learn more about the school and the internal, procedures in place, and also to probably engage members of the campus community. But again, I would say that's not a rule of general application. We've seen it live and direct, because these issues are not distant to us. We've seen it live and direct. We've engaged with a lot of, institutions leadership across private institutions. And I'm glad to share that we've supported about 50 higher education institutions to develop their anti-sexual harassment policy. And out of these institutions, with private institutions, we are always experiencing a brick wall. They always tell us we have all the mechanisms in place, we do not need help. I think we need to be wary of statements like that, and institutions who come across as having everything in place, which means there are no gaps and there is nothing to strengthen. That in itself, I consider a negative signal.
Okay, thank you.
Omowunmi, then how best can we ensure accountability, right? And I'm going to throw the question at you as well, Benneth. How can we ensure accountability and uphold ethical conduct among faculty members, especially faculty members?
So first, I would say that in terms of fiscal infrastructure, we need to put the necessary fiscal infrastructure in place where for every higher education institutions, they probably have transparent doors that do not make such environment fatal for the practice or for the perpetration of sexual harassment. But I think the underlying factor that we need to consider, which we all need to push for, to enhance institutional accountability, is the passage of the anti-sexual harassment bill. It is long overdue. That bill seeks to preserve, it creates an ethical framework to preserve the sanctity of educator and learner's fiduciary relationship of trust, authority, and dependency. And it also seeks to preserve the right to human dignity. And I would say that that piece of legislation is really unique because it highlights patterns of behaviors that constitute sexual harassment. We've seen people justify sexual harassment saying they do not even know that it's sexual harassment. We've seen people justify sexual harassment saying that the student consented, forgetting that when you're in a relationship of unequal power relations, and when you have to think of the consequences of saying no, it is then not consent anymore, because consent has to be freely given, and it has to be enthusiastic. And as such, a student or an educator who is actually in a subordinate position to another educator does not have the capacity to give consent. And of course, the bill also clearly articulates steps to take when you have experienced sexual harassment. So accountability starts from assuming the responsibility that the safety of students falls squarely on the shoulders of college administrators. And with that, you would put reporting mechanisms in place. Why would students resort to social media to escalate issues? Why would students resort to, reporting to external platforms as against what currently obtains internally? So for us as an organization and for me as an individual, I would say that institutional accountability starts from putting all those measures in place. I would be surprised if we have up to 10 institutions allocating resources to institutional mechanisms.
Thank you,
institutional accountability mechanisms.
Thank you. Let's turn to Dr. Eze to give his answer very quickly. Dr. Eze.
Okay, we have to look at it from diverse perspective. Number one, what does the school stand to gain? Most times we say if they report a case of sexual harassment and most times it brings negative publicity to this. It's a lie. What the masses are interested in is what did you do? Every father, every mother is interested in the fact that if my ward should complain about sexual harassment in your school, this school will definitely do something. Number two, the integrity, the sanctity of your degree is at stake. Because the implication is that somebody can get anything with sex. And when somebody is parading a first-class degree from your school, it becomes questionable. That's number two. Number three is the fact that it is even against humanity. And on that basis, every institution should do the right thing. And number one factor you have to do to put an end to this is consequences. I know for sure if you accuse me, if you accuse me today and I face the panel, my university's panel is just 1 week. 1 week. If I face the panel, in 2 weeks, they will sack me. I know for sure. And as a result, it's a deterrent. Because I know my food is at stake. And apart from that, when they sack in a tertiary institution, the implication is this. If another university wants to employ you, they make reference to the previous university. And when they write them, we write to ascertain the character of so-so person. They will state it clearly. So-so person was actually our staff. He was sacked as a result of sexual harassment. Nobody will employ the person. So number one is consequences. Once there is consequences attached to it, it will reduce.
Dr. Benneth Eze, I want to say thank you very much for coming to see. And also, Omowunmi, thank you very much for also joining us via online. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.